All right, welcome to our third open data journey. Today is, this is not recording. Oh no, it is recording, great. All right, so today's BetaNYC's third open data journey. It is Friday, October 23rd, and today we're going to explore and investigate tenant housing and displacement issues through data in New York City. So our co-hosts today are Emily Goldman, Gabby Langston, Inez James, and myself, Kate Nicholson. And you'll meet all of us throughout the event. We've all signed in. We're going to have a quick little welcome and introduction, and then we're going to get started with the journey. And at the end, we'll have a few minutes for questions and remarks. So open data journeys are our way of showing the public how to harness open data and civic tech tools to investigate and monitor issues in their community. BetaNYC has long been passionate about making sure that open data is an accessible tool for all New Yorkers since the open data law passed in 2012. So we think it's a vital tool for everyone to be able to access and use to build tools and to gain insight into their communities. We definitely love seeing how folks have been using open data, especially right now during the pandemic. There's been a lot of great things coming to it, a lot of shifting of how of data. There's been new data created. There's been data about open streets and outdoor dining and parks that people are getting access to during this crisis. So you can check out lots of information in the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics recent report on open data connecting New Yorkers. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Councilmember Antonio Reynoso. Councilmember Reynoso is the council member for the 34th District in New York City. And so that is Bushwick, Ridgewood, Williamsburg, and parts of North Brooklyn. We were approached and we were talking to the council member about in his office about housing issues in their district. And they were really passionate about having an event or working with us on an open data journey that would just highlight some civic tech tools and data sets that people can use to track and stay sort of abreast of the issues going forward through the crisis. So Councilmember Reynoso is also the chair of the Sanitation Committee, and he's been a leader throughout his 2 terms in addressing socioeconomic and racial disparities citywide, and especially around land use and transportation and mobility issues. So we're really excited to have him here to kick off with us. So I am going to look, and is Asher here? Oh, let's see.
Oh, everyone, while we're finding Councilman Reynoso, I just wanted to thank someone in the chat room for helping us create an easy link for the person who was unable to get onto the Zoom app. So if you go to bit.ly/data-journey3, you will get to this presentation. So hopefully that would be useful for the person who wasn't able to get onto the Zoom app.
Thank you, that's great. So I'm just looking, I guess Asher, or is anybody here from Councilmember Reynoso's office present? If so, please come off mute and say hello. No, okay, well maybe they're late, so we'll just have them join and say hello during the event when they come on. I would also like to mention that we have another guest in the room. Lucy Block is a friend of BetaNYC and a research and policy associate at the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development, and a member of the Housing Data Coalition, which is a really great coalition of people who came together to advocate for housing issues and the use of data to sort of propel that. So at the end, we're really excited to have her insight, and we hope that you think of questions to ask as we go through things. Great. So today's topic is housing. New York City, as many people probably already know, faces an affordable housing crisis, which basically comes down to rents having risen a lot faster than incomes, and there not being enough affordable housing for people to live. Now with COVID, the situation has exacerbated. Unemployment is soaring. According to the Community Housing Improvement Program, a quarter of renters haven't paid rent since March. Landlords are running out of savings. This is creating a really complex and interesting and scary, I guess, situation. So something that we're particularly interested in and that we think communities can become interested in through the use of data is tracking sort of things that might be occurring going forward as landlords struggle to pay their mortgages, as renters struggle to pay their rents. We want to make sure that actions aren't taken that affect tenants. So we're going to be using data and civic tech tools today to see what sorts of things we can identify when we look at maps of buildings and see sort of who's at risk of displacement, who is having a lot of issues, where there's sort of key issues taking place throughout a community. And we're going to be looking at District 34. So with this type of information, community groups, decision makers, residents can begin to take strategic steps to push back with outreach, education, and organizing. And the more we can know about the changes occurring in our communities, the closer we can become to preventing, the closer we can get to preventing displacement and the loss of community. So we'll be looking at a series of data sets through the lenses of several civic tech tools. These are the data sets, and we'll be going through them with Onedeige and Gabby in a second, as well as the tools. So BoardStat, ACRIS, the Displacement Alert Project Map, and Portal, Who Owns What, and the New York City Department of Buildings Information Search. So we'll be going through a step-by-step guide on how to use those tools and check out housing issues in District 34. So just a quick refresher on 311 data. There we go. We just want to quickly point out that 311 is a way to make requests about your community or about an issue that you have in your neighborhood. And when it comes to housing, there's these requests are submitted to 311, and the folks who handle them are from the Department of Housing, Preservation and Development, and Department of Buildings. There are complaint types, which describe the topic of the condition or the incident being reported, and then there's descriptors which provide further details and information about that topic, about that complaint type. So today, where are we going to go? Today's journey is adapted from our civic innovation curriculum when it was originally designed to show community board members how to use BoardStat and other tools to guide resolution writing around housing. And today's journey is going to present these tools to you and show you how you can sort of pinpoint buildings and go in a deep dive to learn about that building, who owns it, what types of complaints, what the history of complaints is, and sort of bridge a few different tools to gain a better and fuller picture of the housing issues in a specific area or address. So without further ado, I'm going to first ask, is anyone from Councilmember Reynoso's office here with us yet? If not, we're going to get started with Onedeige. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Can you kindly repeat the bit.ly link, please?
Oh, yes.
Absolutely. That is bit.ly/data-journey3.
Great. All right. Onedeige, are you able to screen share? I'm gonna stop.
Yes, I will go ahead and do that now. Actually, no, you'll need to enable that for me.
Oh, you're not a co-host yet. My bad. There we go.
Alrighty. Let's
Has anyone been to previous journeys before? if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, feel free to let us know who you are, why you're interested in housing and these tools. We'd love to know.
Okay, so I'm going to get started. Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to see everybody here. It's good to have a good crowd. I will be taking us through Queens Community Board 5. First, we're going to start off using BoardStat to identify the most prevalent complaint types within the entire community board. But why BoardStat? This is used to get an overview on the types of complaints in the area. What is BoardStat? It's a tool that simplifies data pulled directly from the 301 Open Data Portal. It was created through a collaborative effort between BetaNYC and community boards and their needs. Clicking on the link brings us to the BoardStat homepage, where I'm going to select the borough, which is Queens. In BoardStat, we're going to look at the complaints in Queens CV5 using our last heat season, during our last heat season. The heat season in New York City is when all residential building owners are required to maintain indoor temperatures at 68 degrees when outdoor temperatures fall below 55 degrees during the day. The heat season is typically between October 1st to May 31st. After selecting Queens on the first page, it brings me to the filter page. The navigation throughout the tool uses the purple navigation bar to the left. We enter our community board and the dates and navigate to page 2 and the date range, the same date range for the heat season.
Sorry to interrupt, Inej. Just quickly, I see that the council member Reynoso has joined us, so I wanted to just hand the floor over to him if he's—
Sure, I'm going to stop sharing and we'll come back to me after.
Great. Great, so let's see. Council member, if you'd like to come off mute, that's great. Welcome.
Hello, hi. Thank you so much, and I'm so sorry. I had a technical difficulties, but I want to thank everybody for being here and appreciate all the work that BetaNYC is doing. Look, for a lot of us, what we're doing is inserting ourselves into the policymaking world, especially for elected officials. And what we've learned for quite some time is that a lot of the work we're doing is not based on facts, it's not based on data. The information that we get is sparse or doesn't tell the whole story. So the work that BetaNYC is doing and being able to take information from city agencies and the reporting that is happening by the city really helps lay the foundation as to how we're going to be building and making policy moving forward. So at the core of it is housing. The fact that BetaNYC is not looking at information that you guys are probably already starting to look at, but looking at information related to 311 calls that we have that is available to us, but it isn't necessarily organized in a way that we can disaggregate or build meaningful policy off of. So, sorry. So I just want to thank BetaNYC and thank everyone for being here. Again, I'm sorry for the technical difficulties, but at the end of the day, want to make sure that we get this information and really appreciate everyone that's on this call. So peace to all of my data nerds. Really appreciate you and the great work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and shout out to all the other Civic techies who've made tools around housing data that we're using today as well. So we're excited to share our tools and the others, the other tools that are out there. Yeah, so I'll hand it back to Inej and we'll jump right back into the journey. Thank you so much, council member, and looks like you're out there doing some fun things. All right.
Okay, and we are back. Let me know if you guys can see the screen. Everyone see?
Looks great.
Okay, great. All right, so continuing, we get to After filtering to our community board and our heat season, we navigate to page 2 to view by community board. This gives us an overview of the data in different forms. We have the top 10 complaint types, the individual descriptors and their counts, and overall complaints, a map showing the distribution of the complaints, and a list of the addresses and location of these complaints. In the bar graph, we see we're going to be looking at heat and hot water in my journey, and on the bar graph, we see that heat and hot water is the 4th complaint type. So I'm going to click on the heat and hot water bar, and this is going to filter the other 3 panels to show heat and hot water descriptors, the address for those descriptors, and the count of the requests. Note that the top address for both of these descriptors is 1713 Harmon Street. Now, there are 2 descriptors for this complaint type: apartment only for complaints about situations concerning one apartment, and entire building for complaints affecting the entire building. It's pretty self-explanatory. But today I'm going to focus on entire building descriptors. So I click on that descriptor right under the graph, and that filters the page again to the location with the most entire building descriptors, which we see is still 1713 Harmon Street with 313 complaints. On the map, we see that this is represented by the largest bubble. And notice that this address has 3 times the complaints compared to the second address on the list. So let's see what else BoardStat can tell us about this address. Let's navigate to page 3, look up by address. So we enter our date range for the last heat season and the address of interest, 1713 Harmon Street. This page gives us a tree map, a line graph, a list of the complaints with their resolutions. However, there is only one complaint on the tree map for heat and hot water. An interesting point to note is that some of these resolutions indicate that there are a number of duplicates in the list. What does that mean? The complaints were filed within a short time frame of each other. Using the highlighted as an example, we see that these were filed on the same date within a few hours of each other in the very early morning. So a number of these complaints may just be duplicates based on tenant frustration. A good example of how data can be interpreted in different ways. So what do we do next from here? Let's do a 3-year comparison. Maybe this was a one-time occurrence, or on the flip side, a regular occurrence over the years. So we're going to navigate to page 6 on BoardStat, viewing trends. I'm going to expand our date range here, going back to the heat season of 2017. We click on the heat and hot water on the tree map and see descriptors start with relatively low numbers, and one that climbed significantly in 2018 and only dipped slightly in 2020. You can also hover or click on the map to see, on the line graph, to see the descriptors and their totals for each year. It's clear that the blue line is for entire building, and that's where we've had that significant increase, and it hasn't leveled out yet. We also have other ways to view this information. Same trend. Here's another view using page 6. Noting that the filters at the top of the page and the resulting trend. There are a few outliers on this graph, but it generally carries the same shape. Important to note is that weather conditions might affect these, such as mild or heavy winters. And that can be seen on this line graph. Page 7 is yet another way to view these results. It's an annual view. Give me 1 second, I just lost my notes. Okay, so why are we having all these complaints at this location? Maybe the building has a lot of apartments, maybe it's an old building. Is it rent stabilized? Is it at risk for deregulation? If it is, what can we learn about the building and its tenants? Well, first we need to find out if the building is rent stabilized. For that, I'm going to be using the DAP map tool. So what is DAP map? It's the displacement alert project map that gives us historical data on residential displacement in New York City. It's updated twice a year. It shows us the loss of rent stabilized units, property sales, construction permits, and marshal executed evictions beginning in 2017. These 4 layers, each is represented as a risk layer on the map. I will be using 2 of these layers, deregulation and eviction. The color legends are provided, and generally the closer to red, the more risk there is. Just a note for deregulation risk, this data is not always accurate because it is self-reported numbers by building owners. So we navigate to DAP map and we have the risk layers and the boundaries on the right pane, and we have the search bar on the left. I search for my address and I can use the geography layers to find out what council district it belongs to, for example. Here we have a view of District 34 and we see our address is located within this district. Note the cluster of buildings with colors yellow to red as we zoom into our address. We see that it's white on the deregulation scale. Let's take a quick look on the eviction tab though. So we switch tabs and we click on the eviction risk, and we see that there's no current data that support eviction risk based on the data available in DAP map at the moment, because the area isn't highlighted by any color. So I'm going to go back to the deregulation risk and noting that I go back to the deregulation risk and I'm going to click on the white box representing the building address. I'm going to get this pop-up where we can see 1, it's a rent stabilized building, 2, it has 6 units in total, and 3, all 6 are rent stabilized. This is a fully regulated rent stabilized building. It's precious stock of rent stabilization, a building to keep an eye on in this district. Also note the color of the properties appearing green, which have gained stabilized units, and the properties appearing yellow, orange, or red, which have lost units. This building is white, indicating there's been no change since 2018. Remember from board stat, there were 313 complaints at this location, 3 times higher than the address, with the second highest complaints. But all these, from the building all these are coming from, only has 6 units. So what is going on with this building? We obviously want to know. So let's check out some of the links on our pop-up. Starting with the Department of Buildings, maybe they can tell us something interesting. Any open building violations, for example. So we click on the link and it opens the DOB info page for this property. We want to look at complaints and violation records. We see, however, that none are open, but there are 5 violations in the past. But are any of them recent, like within the last 3 years? Let's find out by clicking on the violations link. We know that there were no open violations, but now we see that the last reported violation was in 2014. So it's been a while since there have been any violations. Something to consider is if there is a similar pattern with other properties owned by this building owner, or is it just an issue with this particular building? Let's check ACRIS. What's ACRIS? It's the Automated City Register Information System, which allows for the search of property records in 4 boroughs from 1966 to present. From the DAP map, we can click on the ACRIS link as well. This will bring us to this page, and we see the owner is an LLC listed as COM-NYC LLC. But does this owner own other buildings? We want to know because there may be similar trends in complaint types, and that should be interesting. So we're going to navigate to the ACRIS search link. Because the owner is listed as an LLC, we enter the name into the business field and we click search. This is the result. The block and lot number is the same throughout the search results. So we see that there's only one property owned by this LLC. But it's an LLC, and as an LLC, sometimes an owner might purchase property using multiple LLCs or using other names. How can we find out more? Like who the landlord is. To find this out, we're going to use who owns what to see if there is additional info available, not available directly through Acris. Who owns what is a free tool from justfixit.nyc as a way to identify building owners in New York City. So we click on the link on the dot map for who owns what as well. This brings us to this page. We have the map on the left, the building info in the middle, and the photo showing the street view of the building. The first thing we notice is that there are 12 buildings associated with the owner of the building at 1713 Harmon Street. The building info shows us the parties listed on the LLC, and we see one name occurring multiple times, Chung Lao, and this is likely the building owner. Taking a look at the summary tab, we see that the most common names listed on the other properties, and we see that Chung Lao is listed first. In addition, we see the business address for the LLC as well. When we click on timeline, we can find other information such as the HPD violations. And we see that since the building was purchased in 2014, was it purchased? We see that the HPD violations have steadily increased throughout the years, all the way to present. It's been steadily growing. Next, we're going to click on the other tab, and we see the profile tab, and we see that a list of all 12 properties and their officer or owner. I'm just going to focus on the ones with Chung Lao listed as the officer. And what I did is I just went back to BoardStat to look at the 311 complaints at these addresses, just to see if there was a trend. However, looking at these addresses through BoardStat, only 2 of them had 311 data for that time period, which was like the last heat season. There were no heat and hot water complaints. And the few complaints that they did have were for dirty conditions and non-emergency police matters. So there's no correlation there. To review, what did the data tell us so far? In the heat, hot, and water, it was a top 10 complaint last heat season in community board. In this community board 5, there were 1,172 entire building complaints, 494 apartment only complaints. The address with the most entire building descriptors were 313. There was no eviction risk, no historic deregulation risk, no current DOB violations on the building, but HPD violations have steadily increased over the years since purchase. The landlord and owner is associated with 12 properties, but there's no found relationship between the complaints at the property that we investigated and the other properties listed. This journey brings together BoardStat, and map to paint a full picture of housing issues. Well, maybe not a full picture, but full enough. So we have lots of heat and hot water complaints per unit, plus a rent regulated building. We need to keep an eye on this building, see what happens. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Is everyone able to see my screen?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Alrighty. Awesome. So hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gabby Langston. And thank you all for being here today. And tonight I will be presenting on housing complaints in Brooklyn CB1. Okay. So as most of you may already know, Brooklyn Community Board 1 serves the communities of Greenpoint and Williamsburg. And to get started into our journey, we're going to use BoardStat. Okay, so first and foremost, we want to select our borough. And then next, we want to filter to Community Board 1. Okay, after which we'll be taken to this page. This is page 2, view by community board. And this has a lot of info, so let's get into it. So in the top left quadrant, we have the top 10 complaint types. On the top right, we have a map of New York City. On the bottom left are counts that are grouped by complaint type and descriptor. And on the bottom right, we have counts that are grouped by location. Okay, so using this interface, I wanted to answer, how do heat and hot water complaints fare in Brooklyn CB1 between October of last year and May of this year, which, as Annette mentioned earlier, was the New York City heating season from last year. Okay, so heading back to our dashboard here, we ask, where is heat and hot water in the top 10 complaint types? And we see, in fact, that it ranks 4th. So to get more details about this complaint type, we're going to click on the bar, heat and hot water, within this bar chart. And once we do, we're taken to a brand new interface. So this is now an overview specifically filtered for heat and hot water. Okay, so if you notice now, our dashboard has changed. So we have here some descriptors listed. So these are descriptors for, oops, there. Sorry about that, my thing just froze. So if we look here, there you go. So if we look here in the bottom left-hand corner, we have now descriptors for the entire building and apartment only. And then it's worth noting on the bottom right-hand corner that the top address with heat and hot water complaints is 417 Lorimer Street. Okay, so just to summarize, over an 8-month period, there have been 97 complaints in one location. So as a result, my address of interest today is going to be 417 Lorimer Street. Okay, so next, what I wanted to do was visualize heat and hot water complaints throughout Brooklyn Community Board 1 for last year versus this year. And I wanted to do the entire 2019 season and compare that through September of this year, because if I use the original date range of October from last year through May of this year, it won't allow me to compare any months. And as a result, that may leave out important details. To do so, we go to page 7, which is known as View Annual Breakdown. And we have a bunch of filters to do. So first and foremost, we're going to filter to Brooklyn Community Board 1. We also need to filter by date range. So that's January 1st of 2019, all the way through September 30th of this year. Also need to filter by complaint type. So that's going to be heat and hot water. I also chose to include all descriptors. And also worth noting, we do have our years that are color-coded. So all this led me to ask, is there a month in 2020 where the number of complaints outnumber those from 2019? And the answer is yes, in fact. So it turns out April is the only month where the 2020 heat and hot water complaints outnumber those from 2019. And to be more specific, last year in April, there were 123 complaints compared to this year when there were 139. It's also worth noting that January of 2019 had the most heat and hot water complaints out of all the months, and it had 690 complaints. Okay, so after navigating through board stat and taking everything into account, I couldn't help but wonder what type of building is 417 Lorimer Street. And since we now know the number of complaints, how can we find out more details regarding these complaints? And so to do so, I opted to use Stat Portal. Okay, so as you heard earlier, my colleague Onedeige decided to use Stat Map, and I'm going to use Stat Portal. Both tools are absolutely amazing and crucial in finding information on displacement. So Stat Map, as was mentioned earlier, updated twice per year, and it shows info regarding rent stabilized units, property sales, construction permits, and marshal executed evictions. With Stat Portal, there are 3 features. So there's property lookup, there's district dashboard, and custom search. And in short, and that portal does a lot, but in short, the Stat Portal allows you to analyze displacement threats at a building level, across zip codes, and across districts as well. And just to reiterate, both tools from DAP provide crucial information on displacement. Okay, so as I mentioned, there were 3 features of DAP Portal. So today I'll be using one of those features, the property lookup feature. Okay, so once we log onto the DAP Portal, this is going to be our overview page. We can actually search by address. So I went ahead, typed in my address, and once I did so, I was taken to the property lookup page. And once I arrived here, I wanted to focus on HPD complaints. So that's actually one of the tabs listed here in dark blue. And my reason for doing so is because HPD complaints are complaints made by tenants who called 311, and this will allow me to provide a link to BoardStat. Okay, so once I did that, I decided to scroll down the page, and we see we have a brand new interface and lots of really cool info. So first, it's worth noting the date range of this data set is from February 5th of 2002 through September 30th of this year. And this data set was last updated on October 1st. And this data will be updated monthly automatically. And as we can see here, there's total complaints and total problems. So we see there's a total of 1,187 complaints. But complaints can have more than one problem associated with it. So I think as a result, I think that's why there were 1,605 problems. Something else we can do with this data set, we can filter by status. So we could either leave it open, status only, closed status only, or we can opt to use both. Another option is to export this data set as a CSV file, which actually ended up coming in handy for me. And lastly, you can expand your rows. So if you don't like seeing 10 rows in your data set, you can expand up to 100 rows at a time. And it is worth noting that in this screenshot here, these are not all the columns of the data set. There's actually 10 columns, and the screenshot here shows the first 6 columns. Okay, so using all this info, let's take a look at the first 10 rows of this data set as an example. Okay, so we see here that for all 10 rows, there is the same complaint ID. And, I am brand new to this, so I may get this wrong, just to put it out there. But I'm not sure, but I think maybe it means that it has more than one problem associated with it, since the complaint ID was replicated numerous times. And then the same thing happened with the dates. I noticed that September 23rd this year, that was repeated 10 times in a row. And then going to our space types, where in the apartment are these complaints happening? So we see there are various space types. Some of the most common ones include a kitchen, the entire apartment, bathroom. So definitely really interesting. And then there's also major and minor categories which help constitute these complaints. So these categories provide more detail on these complaints. And for instance, plumbing appeared a bunch of times, and plumbing was often associated with the basin, sink, steam pipe, riser, heat and hot water was another category that appeared, and associated that was apartment only. Okay. Also worth noting, we can get even further details than the ones we already have. So there are various descriptors here. And so for instance, I mentioned earlier about plumbing. So we find here through these descriptors that for plumbing, we have a detached sink, a broken faucet, as well as a disconnected toilet. So that provides some further information on the complaint. And lastly, we have our status description. This is our 10th column, status description. And I noticed that for at least the first 10 rows, it was the same status description. And if you actually want to get the statement in full, then you just click on the description fields within a data set. So using these techniques, I wanted to find out more details about our building at 417 Lorimer Street, specifically for the last heating season. But to do so, I decided to, from the DAP portal, I decided to export the table of HPD complaints as a CSV file, and then I decided to analyze the data in Excel. I used techniques such as pivot tables and filtering dates, so I can filter to our last heating season. I won't go into details now regarding these techniques. I'll just take up too much time, but long story short, you can learn how to do these techniques through one of BetaNYC's open data trainings. Okay, so after we did the analysis in Excel, these were some takeaway points. So first and foremost, at 417 Lorimer Street, during the last heating season, there were 154 complaints and problems filed. Now, most of these complaints concerned the entire apartment, as well as the kitchen and bathroom. Now, 32 out of these 154 complaints were heat and hot water. 91 out of these 154 complaints or descriptors in those complaints were described as no heat. And lastly, for the resolution descriptions, I apologize, 113 of them stated that the HPD receives more than one complaint and that the complaints were closed. And to be more specific, this was actually the statement that was issued regarding those resolution descriptions. Also, I found out something else. So 154 complaints this past heating season. Now, 137 of them did come from the same apartment. So it's definitely a red flag for me and something that I am interested in looking more into and learning more about it. Okay, so next I want to head back to that portal and learn some more fun facts about our building. Specifically, I want to find out how many units there are in the building, who owns it, and whether the owner has other properties. Okay, so back to that portal we are, and we see that there are a few drop-down menus here. So first we have the property info menu, which has a lot of info. So first and foremost, we see here that the building is located in the 34th Council District, and it is located in Brooklyn Community Board 1, which we already knew earlier from board stat, but it's nice to have that verification. Now, further in the property info menu, we see that the building is in fact a residential building with 48 units. right? And we see here that in addition to having 48 units, we see that all of them are rent stabilized. Okay, so next we have another menu, which is right below. This is the ownership menu. And we find some crucial info. So we see here that Mr. Ephraim Chandler owns the building. We see that the owner on record is Cabana Apartment Housing Developments. And lastly, we see that there are 21 associated properties. So I'm just to take a quick pause and summarize what we've seen so far. So first and foremost, we learned the owner's name. We learned the owner on record. Also, there are 21 associated properties, of which one of those properties is in fact our building at 417 Lorimer Street, which is a residential building with 48 units, all of which are stabilized, rent stabilized. Okay, so just to conclude with that portal, we see at the bottom of the ownership menu, there is a link to who owns what. And who owns what is going to help us find more info about those other buildings that are associated with this owner. Okay, so once we click that link that we just saw in that portal, we're taken straight to this page. And we see here's some info that jumps out. So it reiterates that our search address is associated with 21 buildings. Also, we see that the name Cabana appears again for the business entity. So La Cabana Apartments, LLC. And also, this is actually the first tab of Who Owns What. This is the overview page. Okay, so now this is still Who Owns What, but now this is the timeline page. And this allows us to view our data of HPD complaints over time since 2014. It is worth noting you can filter. You can filter this graph, and I'm actually going to filter to month momentarily. I also want to point out there's this really useful description box on the right-hand side, which gives an explanation of what HPD complaints are. And it also specifies the difference between emergency as opposed to non-emergency complaints. So just to read off, emergency complaints are reported to be hazardous, and non-emergency is everything else. Okay, so in terms of filtering, I wanted to filter by month. In the bar chart, so I wanted to compare what was going on in the last heating season. And it seems that the highest number of complaints occurred in October of 2019 of HPD complaints. So 71 of them they're all emergency complaints, all 71 of them, and none of them were considered to be non-emergency. So navigating to our next tab in Who Owns What, this is a summary page, and it provides some really interesting information. So we see here under the landlord section that Mr. Chandler is one of 5 landlords, which appear the most frequently throughout the 21 portfolios. There's also a section for evictions. So that states that last year across the 21 properties, there were 6 evictions was located in the Bronx. Okay, and this is now the portfolio page. So this gives us a listing of all of the associated properties, provides detailed, boroughs, zip code, the borough block unit, the year it was built and all that. And our address is located further down here. And it is worth noting our borough block lot. And that's going to be really helpful from when we navigate to ACRIS. That's because ACRIS allows us to search for a history of transactions. So once we log onto ACRIS, from that link provided through Who Owns What, we're actually taken directly to this page. And we see here that the borough block lot does match. That's great. So we know that we're looking at our building at 417 Lorimer Street. And the last transaction on record was indeed with La Cabana Apartments in July of 2018. Also worth noting that in 2018, there was also a transaction for about $55 million. I'm not, just to be honest, I don't know why it's happening, but that is certainly something I'm interested in looking at. Okay, so I guess quickly just to summarize, we learned several things today. So heat and hot water ranked 4th in Brooklyn CB1 in the last heating season. 417 Lorimer Street had the most complaints. It's a residential building with 48 units. And the majority of complaints in the last heating season came from one apartment. Also, this building is owned by Ephraim Crew Chandler of La Cabana Apartments. And in fact, this is one of 21 properties that's under their ownership throughout Brooklyn, Manhattan, and the Bronx. Also, across this portfolio, there were 16 executed evictions last year. Lastly, La Cabana Apartments owned a building as recently as 2018, but also worth noting that same year, there was a $55 million transaction. So all that was able to answer a lot of questions regarding, specific building in Brooklyn CB1. I still have a lot more questions to ask. And in the future, I want to look more at the breakdown of complaints from the single apartment, see what's going on, what's behind that $55 million transaction, and are there housing complaints and those other associated properties? And if so, how are they distributed? Yeah, thanks.
By the way, it's La Cabana.
I apologize. Gabanya? Sorry about that.
See.
Awesome, great feedback. I'm loving all this feedback. It makes me just realize it'd be so great to figure out ways to get more community feedback throughout the development of these journeys. Congratulations, Gabby and Inej. Those were both such great journeys. Gabby and Inej are Civic Innovation Fellow graduates and now work with our team. And they are just being introduced to this topic. So they spent, some time diving in and learning and researching. And this is the first time that they're really like getting into housing issues. So, maybe we have some potential housing leaders in our future here. But that was really awesome. And thank you so much. So I'm going to quickly share my screen and we can get into questions. If you have a question, post it in the chat or use the question. Actually, I don't think we're in a meeting, so I don't think we have question features. But I'll just share my screen and feel free to come off of mute if you have a question. As long as we're not talking over each other, I think we can figure out a way to do that as well. So yeah, complex topic. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep, that's great.
And co-host, feel free to stay off of mute. I love the background noise. Makes me feel more human. So complex topic, as you can see, there's a ton of tools, a ton of different data. We're definitely curious to hear what your questions are. I saw a bunch of questions in the chat about what about the duplicates and about data sharing and privacy concerns. So thank you, Lucy, for helping answer those. Does anyone else have questions or we're curious to hear how you're interested in using these tools? Feel free to jump in right now or post one in the chat.
It's Marty Needleman. Just had a question in terms of how does this all relate to the housing authority? I believe none of this stuff, you have no access to any of this stuff. There's no recorded HPD violations, etc., with the housing authority. And it's a different world, even though it's a significant part of the housing mix in New York City and in the borough.
Absolutely, that's an important point. And housing complaints that come from housing authority projects are not even in the New York City's 311 system. So yeah, it's absolutely a hugely important issue that 500,000 units are just absent from a lot of this information. I don't know how we move forward with that other than the borough president in Manhattan has tried in the past to push NYCHA on getting its quote unquote 311 service request data available to the public. That has not happened yet. So due to sort of technical difficulties with getting that data open to the public. So just to reiterate, we don't know what's going on in terms of heat and hot water, plumbing, paint, plaster, mold problems, any of that in all of the housing authority complexes across the city. And that's definitely a really good point to bring up today.
I think we have to push, whether it's legislatively or otherwise, to subject the housing authority to the same obligations and penalties, etc., that is otherwise available to buildings.
This is Diana. I just wanted to ask, following what Marty was mentioning, the issue as far as public housing is concerned, has there been any discussion with the public advocate or the attorney general to be able to litigate what is taking what are the work order numbers that NYCHA goes through as far as documenting complaints, so that that information is then taken to be added to this open data portal?
I don't have a great answer other than we need to be having more of those conversations. Like I think that the kind of general separation between the tenant rights movement and the public housing tenants rights movement, they tend to be like way more siloed than they should be. And I think that like I'm personally, I fall into the same kind of trap because I kind of straddle the like data and policy worlds. And because the data has just been, at least when I started this, like non-existent for NYCHA.
Well, it's there. It's not that it's non-existent.
Yeah.
Right? So we have to stop saying it's non-existent.
Right.
It's that it's not accessible. And so the issue of getting access, either you legislate or you litigate, right? Because if it has formally been asked and it has not been received, then you only have two options left.
Yes, I completely agree with that.
And then my second question, I wanted to ask, same agencies, right? HCR, as far as going back further than 2007, because a lot of the aggressive harassment and displacement is not new, right? This has been going on for 50 years in these neighborhoods. But there was a period of prior to rezonings, right? So going back at the very least from 2001 to 2006, right, which are the missing data sets, to be able to really look at what are upticks in certain years, and you know, where were those rent controlled apartments, rent stabilized apartments, and even further than that, those that entered into new leases. I forget the term where, you know, rents spiked because of that particular term that escapes me right now.
Vacancy increases or vacancy decontrol?
No, not vacancy decontrol. That was after 97. A lot of the new residents fell into the trap of what was this particular clause. And
preferential rent.
Yes, thank you, preferential rents. And so I don't know if the data sets are picking up on preferential rents, but it would be interesting to understand how many of those units fell into preferential rents as well.
Yeah.
And so just the HCR, just to conclude, you know, we've had conversations with HCR, we as in, you know, government, right? When I was serving in the council and then as deputy borough president, to be able to track what were those particular issues, and they were beginning to do so, right? What has happened since then, I do not know. We're talking about 2013, but they have that data, and it's a matter of either litigating or legislating. And so I just wanted to share that because, you know, this is all part of the fair share issues that we continuously fought for and use to be able to access government to do what is fair share planning and resources distribution, and government fails to actually do it, and then there's an accountability, but the damage has been done. And so this particular open data through the BetaNYC has really opened a door for us to continue to have more of a preventive tool than a reactive tool. So I just wanted to commend the work because I know that, you know, with what was the board stat, it was something that we were trying to incorporate with the community boards, who, by the way, are not considered an agency, and we need to fix that as well. So if there's an opportunity for BetaNYC to position what is having the community boards be a part of what you're doing, because they are clueless as far as accessible data like this for their benefit to be able to address issues as they come to the actual board. So, you know, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And you didn't present Community Board 4, which was what I was waiting for. So if you have an opportunity to do that, I can certainly use the open data to search for Community Board 4, but I thought you were going to give a full overview of the full district. Thank you.
Yeah, we didn't have quite enough time, but hopefully you can mimic some of the steps that Gabby and Inej took, or maybe there's someone you work with that could. Thank you for joining us, former Councilwoman Diana. It's awesome to have your insight here. And I just also want to quickly shout out the Housing Data Coalition has done a lot of work too around this issue in particular with getting data, cleaning it, making it accessible, visible. And we do have 2 upcoming trainings with community boards to show them different tools for accessing data. And I think these conversations around, you know, what is the next step? This is often like a big question when it comes to data. It's like, all right, we have the numbers, but like, what is the action that we can take? And this is where it's really important to get lots of people in the room to look at the data, talk about it, and define those next steps. So, you know, I'm looking to the people in the room who have the expertise and are part of the issue and can take this insight and go do something with it. So if you have ideas for actions, definitely share them. We're happy to promote them, put them in our newsletter, continue the dialogue, however possible. So I saw some other questions in here. Does anybody, there was one about APIs and it looks like it was resolved. So yeah, so the displacement alert map has an API for every data set. And is there any other question that someone has or discussion topic someone would like to share? We have about 5 more minutes.
Yeah, I thought one of the things that's of interest is that the construction of quote unquote 20% or 30% or 40% quote unquote affordable housing, which is not really affordable to the people who live in the communities. What's the impact of that insofar as it's creating 60% or 70% or 80% of non-affordable housing that becomes, it's more than just that housing, it becomes a magnet for the total, gentrification and displacement of current residents. And, you know, I always say this, the law is what you can get away with, but landlords, when the market is so hot and generates so much money, the landlords will do anything to get people out. And most people don't even know what their rights are, and there's not enough of a support structure for low-income tenants, unfortunately, to protect them. So it's just that new construction with significant amount of quote unquote affordable housing, $2,000 for 200, it's just crazy in the numbers, does not really solve the problem, and it's becoming a mega problem. I mean, it has been a mega problem for a while now, and it continues to be.
Right. So how does imposing that, or when that is carried out, how does that attract and become sort of a magnet for the displacement in a way? I wonder if anyone's researching that or tracking it.
What I would say though is that you need to have mandatory 70 or 80% affordable housing, meaning housing that reaches out to people who are making less than 30% of the area median income, which is the standard, the true standard for lower income people in the neighborhood. Not to mention the fact that unfortunately, a lot of our residents and in the real world are undocumented and then can't formally apply with information. It creates, and that's a mega displaced population as well, which is part of our future. We've all been immigrants in the past, and these problems provoked or against undocumented or current, more recent immigrants are problematic for the future of our areas.
All right. So if there's not any other additional questions, someone just asked about MTA data. As far as I'm concerned, the MTA data is not available on the open data portal because it's state. So Emily, do you know the answer to that? Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff on their website. Yeah, and what's the transit center also probably has some resources. We can, well, this leads me into it's a great segue to some other things. So research and data assistance requests, we're just gonna quickly shout out, we have a service for community boards, council member offices, nonprofit organizations, community organizations. If you have a research or data assistance need, we have a system for helping you fulfill it. So you log on to beta.nyc/radar, and we will, you submit your request and we'll get back to you. But it's something that we've been developing with our Civic Innovation Fellowship Program. So we have students that join us throughout the year and sort of learn the ins and outs of civic tech and our work process, and then they practice and help fulfill community needs through this system. Emily, is there anything you would like to add about radars? Emily leads the Civic Innovation Fellowship Program that we run.
No, there's just, that was great intro. There's just a simple like screen door form to fill in so that, we collect as much information from you as we can before we start to dig into it.
Yeah, and they result in a few different things: maps, reports, letters to agencies. If you'd like to join and have more discussions with us or just keep abreast of our events, you can go to the beta.nyc/community, and there's various different channels you can join us in: Slack, Facebook, Twitter, Meetup, all the things. And then I just want to shout out, we are starting a new event sort of series, or we're going to test it out in November. And it's basically to have a sort of like a format like this at the end, where it's just questions and answers about open data. So we're collecting questions as we gear up to the event, and we're going to have just some sort of casual Q&A with the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned to our Meetup page and our newsletter, and we'll update you with the name, which it was called Office Hours, but that sort of sounds like one-on-one, so we decided to change it. So we're in the process of changing it, but open data sort of conversations, and we're really excited to have them, because I think as we all pointed out, it's the conversations and the actions that come out of the data that are the real critical part of having access to it. So that's it on our end. Gabby, Inej, Emily, anything else on your end? Anyone have any announcements, or anyone from the entire participant group have any announcements? Feel free to share them. Job openings, we love for people to share job searches, whatever it is.
I have a quick announcement. I'm going to be doing a training with Just Fix, who makes the Who Owns What tool, on November 18th. We're going to be training folks on how to use DAP portal and Who Owns What for tenant organizing. So I'll post the link to that in the description. And ANHG is also hiring, but they're not data focused roles.
Oh, there might be some not data focused housing advocates in here, so go check that out.
One is a manager for housing development and preservation policy, and one is a senior housing organizer. So I'll put those in the chat too.
Cool. And we'll make sure to get the info for that event and put it in our November newsletter. That sounds awesome. Anything else? I need some like closing elevator music.
Thank you, guys. Great job.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining us, Marty.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Let's use data to make the world a better place.
Thank you. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
We'll see you next time. One day Zoom will have some closing music features. Right?
Imagine, Gabrielle, thank you so much. It was really fun to watch.
Lucy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for.
Thanks for the invite.
So great, so great.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Gabby and Ed, awesome work. Emily, awesome work, support, everything.
Whew. Yeah, we did it.
Yay. Oh, I'm gonna stop recording.
A lot of learning over the last few weeks.
For sure.